With me is Russ Baker, the editor of WhoWhatWhy.com. Welcome back, Russ. Let's begin with the fact that internet sites are being banned in this country without us seeming to know why they're banned, because it's not just for porn, it's for terrorism.
Well, and it's not just for terrorism. One statement that I read referred to the problem of people being too radical, and that it was better for the UK if people not be exposed to radical ideas because the great majority is more moderate, is actually what the statement said. It was peculiar to me because I like to think that in a vibrant democracy, we want to let people hear all of the ideas, understand where different types of people are coming from, and then be able to debate that.
We don't have a US Constitution here, of course, which guarantees that, arguably, but how serious do you think it is that this has been revealed?
I mean, I think this is grounds for real concern. Recently, we saw an inquiry into people in this country who are representatives of the Muslim Brotherhood in Egypt, and they apparently have been targeted as sort of terrorist inclined, but the fact of the matter is that the Muslim Brotherhood was democratically elected in Egypt. It was the military that usurped power illegally, and I see that Tony Blair was over in Egypt praising the military for taking power back from the democratically elected people. So once you get the government here involved in blocking internet sites of or groups that they perceive as being unwelcome, you've got a real problem.
And what do you think is behind because presumably the terrorists can get access to this material if they really want it. After all, what they're doing is illegal.
That's right. I mean, we have the same thing in the United States, where it's a question of how much how much real terrorism is there? And the spy agencies were forced to admit that they could not even name a single case of where they were able to actually interdict a terror attack by all of these kinds of measures, restricting public access to information or monitoring the public itself.
Now, obviously, government ministers here aren't explaining the some 6,000 UK-based sites that are not available, but on the other hand, something like WikiLeaks, the US and UK administrations didn't like, they failed to ban them. So what exactly is going on with the banning of websites?
Well, you have to wonder about those numbers. I mean, they sort of mix in child abuse with terrorism, and then they use the term radical, which is not the same as terrorism. And then there's another area about sites that supposedly advocate piracy of licensed materials, which of course is a completely different thing. How they arrive at the magic mix, we don't know. I would be hard-pressed to find that many websites based in the UK, certainly, that would be perceived as terrorist, or for that matter, around the world. I mean, 6,000 is a very big number.
Should we hope big multinational corporations can save us and save freedom in the internet? Because ironically, it is the likes of Google, Yahoo, and others that monopolize arguably bits of the internet that are saying they're against this government Big Brother control of the internet.
That's right, and I think what you're seeing in this case is the government is supposedly deputizing private companies to create these filters. They don't want to tell us which private companies they are. It's a little bit of a conundrum because we can't figure anything out, and of course your own members of parliament won't be able to do anything about this if they don't have the most basic information. But it is sort of the sad fact that you end up having to get certain corporations against other corporations protecting our freedoms when no one else will do it.
How seriously should we take the corporations who say, we're out for our customers' freedom, whereas the government isn't? Because after all, seemingly the Edward Snowden documents reveal that were they part of the problem, or was it just the government?
I think it's a mixed bag. When you run a corporation, your bottom line is profits, as it's supposed to be, and I think everything else is secondary. And so when it's to their advantage to cooperate with the government, I think they've done it. And when it's to their advantage, or when there's an outcry and the public is upset, I think they very clearly want to be seen on the side of privacy and the protection of the rights of their own users.
I mean, we had one case here of someone being imprisoned for downloading material. I think he won compensation in the end. Do you think we'll see more cases like that, or the government have realized that imprisoning people for downloading, in this case it was a guide to radicalization?
I'm not sure. I mean, I think one of the problems is that any of us who are curious, for example, if we wanted to know more about the argument that Iran is or is not developing nuclear weapons, we would want to look at information about how those plants are designed and what would be the criteria of figuring out whether they were or not. And even doing that, particularly with these proposed new regulations here, would have the effect of, particularly if you were in a public place like a library, university or something, and you were trying to go to those kind of sites, that they'd at a minimum be blocking them, if not investigating you.
The Secret Services would say, no, they would easily be able to sort that out. That wouldn't happen.
Well, the problem, again, is when you don't have any accountability, and I hate to sort of compare our countries because our situation's quite bad, but yours is even worse.
And now, as you mentioned, the private outsourcing of the work to agencies. Only one company was named. Other companies are out there because the government are frightened of them being attacked.
They say they don't want these companies to be exposed to something, but it sounds dubious. I mean, they say denial of service, that they would be, massively attacked by computers, but it sounds very, very questionable. What surprises me, really, that we don't hear more politicians here in the UK speaking out about these things and being worried about a slippery slope in terms of the continual deterioration of basic civil liberties. But
then, why do you think they haven't banned, say, communiques or everything from, I don't know, the YouTube leaked telephone call of Victoria Newland to general WikiLeaks cables? So they aren't banning material. It really is something more nebulous.
It's very nebulous, very murky, and again, when you mix together these different criteria, protecting children, protecting corporations, movie companies, music companies, and so forth, and then you throw in terrorism, and then you downgrade that to radicalism, by the time you're finished, you really don't know what they're up to.
Some might argue that mainstream media self-censor in any case. So why the need for a real 1984-style conspiracy of shutting down websites that we don't even know exist before we can ourselves be appalled by them?
Yeah, well, my experience over the years working in mainstream media is we definitely do self-censor to a certain extent, but I think that the whole playing field has changed. People realize that increasingly, and they're looking for new outlets of all kinds, and I think this also is a concern, that there are many more options people have today if they want to investigate for themselves and find out what's going on, what is behind the policies.
Could it drive people who are interested in topics like these underground because the sites aren't available, so they get the information from other sources?
Yeah, well, that's another issue, because of course if you're really trying to prevent small groups of people from executing violent plots, I'm not sure that censoring big sites that are discussing their views is the way to go. Really, of course, it's something else entirely, and they don't really know how to do it. I mean, I think this is one of the problems. They're not actually sure how you get in necessarily and stop these plots involving one individual or a small group of people. And through these kinds of programs, some of it is almost a desire to reassure the public, Parliament and so forth, that yes, we are taking measures, even if those measures are really almost nonsensical.
But for those frightened of the implications that our government is censoring websites that we don't even know about, there may be ways that we can be assured, rest assured?
Well, I mean, obviously, governmental incompetence is one of those things that sort of does, in fact, protect us from the overzealous. But I think the reality is that the more of these kinds of measures in place, and particularly where we don't even know that they exist, where we don't know what they're actually doing, we do have real cause for concern. And that unfortunately, I'm not sure how many of these things actually protect us and how many of them just make life more difficult for the law-abiding among us.
And come to think of it, if GCHQ is looking at IP addresses, accessing sites, if they take the sites down before that they can be accessed, presumably they get less information about the would-be terrorist anyway.
Well, that's right. In fact, even after they complained that all of these sort of Snowden disclosures were causing problems for them, they then later announced that they heard terrorists discussing what to do in reaction to these leaks. So I don't see what the problem is. I mean, they were perfectly able to continue monitoring them after the fact.
Even as they privately admit also that these, and as you said, rare attacks made by terrorists, the communications they use, it's obvious they already know that not to talk about it on the phone, let alone have a big website with a big chat room on it.
That's right. I mean, the reality is that these websites that they're trying to filter now are probably not the core activity that they really need to be looking at.
Russ Baker, thank you.
Thank you very much.